session. So again, welcome everybody. Today's session is really what I believe is the basic practices around manipulating the data so that you're able to deliver, as we say, the analysis on your terms. I'll be focusing on a variety of different grouping techniques to help with understanding how this process works. And I think at the end of this session, I believe you're going to, I hope to learn something new. There's some basics in here, but there's some advanced capabilities as well. So grouping means, like, for example, organizing and defining the technology based on your needs. You jump into data, you're in an environment, your company has a lexicon that speaks of this data in their unique way, and you want to convey the results of your patent search, your literature search, with data points that speak to this, that allows for your audience to read your charts and understand your results based on the way they think. So we'll get into how we do that in terms of grouping technologies and lists of terminology and so forth. Smaller data elements equally. So what I mean by this is primarily the challenges that you might have with keeping smaller entities within your analysis. Yes, you have always, the larger companies, but what about the smaller players, and how can you keep them as part of your data points? And I'll talk about that in a number of ways. And then identifying the few among the many. What do I mean by that? Let's think you have a list of inventors and you have 50 companies in your data, and you'd like to only focus on the inventors or the authors from a particular company or a particular affiliate. We're going to talk about using Matrix to help you with that. So we're going to wrap this all around a case study. I don't know if many of you are familiar with orexin, but it's a neuropeptide that's produced in the brain, a very centralized part of the brain, and it's found to affect a variety of be involved, I should say, with a variety of disorders. Mostly the focus at the moment is with regard to insomnia, but there is a lot of research around orexin and the orexin receptor with regard to aging, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and Huntington's, and we'll explore that in the course of talking about grouping. It's also involved with eating disorders, interestingly enough, and energy metabolism, obesity, anorexia, bulimia, diabetes. So it's a fascinating peptide, and there's a lot of work around not only the agonists of the receptors, the interfering with the signal that orexin generates in the brain, but also the genetics around it. So just kind of keep these elements in mind, because we're going to be using them in the course of this presentation. Briefly, there are meds on the market. Merck, Elisai, Actilon, they have these meds on the market, and true to the analysis, they seem to stand out within the data, them and a number of other companies. But it's kind of a benchmark when you go into these studies. It's nice to see your search results showing particular companies that are known to be in an area of technology, and so keep these in mind as we go through the analysis. So grouping is built around the capabilities under the Refine tab. And I'm going to talk about some basic capabilities and then explore some advanced capabilities. And grouping techniques are with lists, always lists. This is obvious to a lot of you, but maybe some of you who are new to the platform, just kind of keep that in mind. So what is the basic techniques? Simply by scrolling down a list and seeing a term, you can right click on the term and you'll get this pop-up window with all these options, and one is add selection to group, and you'll name a group and you'll add that item that you selected to the group. You know, that's a very manual way, but it's a good way of starting your grouping process. And then there's using the find function. I use the find function a great deal while you're looking at a list. If you just hit Control F, you'll get this window. And just to illustrate, I'm searching anorexin across a list of NLP phrases. And I'm using regular expression, meaning that the string of characters can be found anywhere within a word or what have you. And also the advanced capabilities, you can use adjacency, not, and so forth. So find is a very helpful way to group information, and I'll be demonstrating that. In the area of advanced, we offer the ability to search completely across the entire data set, picking and choosing the fields you'd like to search, but ultimately the results of that search can be added to a group. So that's basically the find capability. List comparison is quite handy in terms of identifying not only what is in common between two groups, but what is unique. And we'll explore that briefly. Matrix, this is something that is not utilized as much, as is not understood. Not really, just doesn't realize it's there. And that is, if you have a matrix, you can select a column or select a row, and you can add that to a group. And I'll describe how that's done. And I like to use it to basically find all the inventors for a particular company, just to isolate them. And then you get grouping automatically when you generate factor maps and concept grids. These are basically clusters of terms that are grouped, and the list that you did your factor map on or did your concept grid on will result in a list that is grouped based on that clustering. And you can take those those groups into further analysis, like clustering documents, or the cluster mapping capability. So that's the basics, but just to kind of explore this a little further, is this concept of building your own fields. And this is really the true part of being able to take the data and start manipulating and managing it so that you can build new fields from your groups. And there's the concept of building groups from the name, building fields from the names of the groups. And there's also the concept of building a field from the items of the groups, items within a group. And again, this is analysis on your terms. We've coined that phrase because that's truly the essence of VantagePoint. Just to kind of explore this a little further, you'll notice I have a list of publication countries. I've applied the thesaurus so that I've defined them. And now I want to manage this a little better, because it's just all these different elements. There's 30 items in here. Graphically, it's just hard to really show this. And how can I group this information to be easier to represent in a graphic, for example? One is by way of regions. And you can build out these regions by either manually, if I select United States and make a new group called North America, I can add that. Same is true for Asia and so forth. But at the end of the day, I've grouped this entire list so that it's in these different regions. And when I tell the system to make a field from group names, I'm basically taking the names and putting it into a new field called regions. And these are now the various groupings of the data that was based before the publication countries. And here now you can start, you have a list here, you can show it in a pie chart and so forth. So that's building from the names, basically the groupings of the data within a list. What about from the items? Because there's some confusion between grouping based on names and grouping based on items. So let's just show you a little bit about grouping from items. Here I have my list again, but I now have my groupings, but I'm only want to focus, say, for example, on Asia. And by clicking on Asia, sorting it and selecting these particular countries within this group, I can now select items and it will show me those within a field called Asia, and I can just work on the Asia information within my analysis and so forth. So that's the other way of taking groups and building new fields, one from group names, one from group items. And then lastly, before we get into just kind of demonstrating this, we have these what we call dialogues that help in the process of building our output, building our reports and so forth. And this particular dialogue is around building a bubble chart. And you'll notice that I've selected my cleaned assignees, and I want to work with a group within the cleaned assignees, and I've picked select group, and this is a drop down that would show you all the groups, and I'm going to work with the 10 companies that I've identified, the top 10 within my cleaned assignee information. And so had I picked all groups, it would be a group name selection. So I would have picked all the group names within that field. Here again, my publication number. I've decided to focus on the period of 2012 to 2022, and allowed me to just pick those years within that group. So you'll see this a lot, these functions being able to pick actual groups within an existing field that has been grouped. And you'll notice now I have the top 10 assignees based on my publication years. And then also through the gear, I can pick additional fields. In this case, I've identified, these different characteristics from the NLP phrases, sleep disorders, eating disorders, and so forth, and saw how they play out in these different organizations over time. Again, just another example, I've basically pulled them together and allowed you to look at that information. So just kind of in a nutshell, this is grouping and so forth. Let's look at it in a more dynamic way through VantagePoint.
Great, thanks, Rick. Let's pause a second, maybe, and check in with our attendees and get a feeling for the experience with polls, with the power of grouping. I've launched another poll. Additionally, we do want to remind everybody that this is meant to be interactive, and please do enter any questions that you might have. You may also, if you want to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, great. Okay, so good. Definitely a little bit of experience with.
That's good to see. Some of you are new to the grouping capabilities, and just looking over the attendees, I know that several of you are veterans of the platform. So, but I think you'll see some new stuff here. So,
great. Any questions before Rick launches into demonstration? Okay, great. Thanks, Rick.
Great. Thanks, Denise. So, okay, so just to kind of a background on this data set, we're working with 823 PAT-based data, and I'll have to give a call out to Microsoft and their generosity in allowing us to use their data in these presentations. It's been very helpful. So this information is basically a Rexon search within PAT-based downloaded. Also, for those of you who are wondering, these are the duplicates are removed and so forth. And so I've ended up with, these different fields, and I'm going to work with some of the abstract data in grouping. And I'm also going to be working with some date field down below here in grouping and so forth. Grouping in general, just for your information, within the summary sheet, you'll notice number of groups. If I sort on this, there are just a listing of all the fields that have been grouped, and grouping can be part of the process of import using an import filter. As for example, if I open up my abstract to English NLP phrases, this happened while the information was imported using an import filter, which I can't emphasize enough. I believe import filters are very helpful. And if you need help with building an import filter, we're here to help. That's part of our service. Just all we need is some sample data, and it really is useful in terms of giving you the information that you need for your analysis. This import filter, if I open this up, it broke it into natural language processing into phrases and words, and just gave us these groups. So the process of actually using refined NLP generated groups on my list. So, these are the multi-word phrases, and the groups are sortable. These are terms that I've actually used in the refined process to tell the system to basically ignore my refined list and so forth. So this is just, be aware that some of our processes actually automatically group information. I'm going to close this out and go back over to the summary sheet. Now, just to kind of get started in the concept of just selecting information, if I open up the refined NLP list, and I'm going to just bring this up a little bit, you'll notice these are all the words and so forth that are in this data that have been broken out into words and phrases. And if I just scan down, I'll begin to see, just kind of giving me a sense of the focus of the terminology and the technology that I'm working in. And you'll notice sleep disorder here. And if I wanted to start working on this, I can right click and add selection to group. And you'll notice it'll open up and give me this dialog box. I have to name the group, and let's just go with sleep disorder. Click enter, and if I just bring this down a notch, you'll see that move this over to help with that. Bring it back up. You'll begin to see where I've added this item to a new group. If I scan down agonist, so forth, you might see other words and so on. But to make it a little easier, why don't we just use the find function? So if I go control find, control F, it brings up this search box. My default is using regular expression, and I'm just going to look for any phrases or words that talk about sleep. And if I just go find, you'll notice that it'll run down the list: sleep apnea, excessive daytime sleepiness, and so forth. And these are all just phrases that are in the abstracts that I'd like to put into my group. So if I select all, I can then add selection to group, and you'll notice I have my sleep disorder, and I can go okay. If I come out of here and then sort, you'll see that I'm, have all of these different ways of describing sleep. And so, this is been done systematically. Other words, like if I go control find wake is related to sleep. If I select all, add to group, again, I can just check off sleep disorders and go okay. Clear selection, and so on and so forth. Maybe if I want to go with another insomnia and so forth, I can start adding them to this list. And so this process of repeatedly searching and adding to the list ends up giving you this type of results. So if I just close out this and go back, you'll notice that I have the same field that I copied and has systematically done this just to show the process of all of the different. Here's sleep disorder by searching words like apnea and insomnia and so forth, adding them to my sleep disorder, eating disorder, and so forth, anorexia nervosa, obesity disorder, and so forth, and Alzheimer's within my psychiatric disorders, and these are now the way I'm interpreting the data. But let's say, for example, I'm interested in just kind of focusing on maybe a broader level of sleep disorders and psychiatric disorders, as well as eating disorders. And I've already done this, and I can use the editing capability under the Refine tab to help me with that. If I go to Edit Groups, you'll notice here are all my different sleep disorders and so forth, my psychiatric disorders. Let's say if I wanted to work with, for example, sleep disorders, psychiatric disorders, just maybe cardiovascular disease, because they're all kind of dealing with aging issues, and I want to OR these together. And I'll give this a new group. I'll just call this sleep slash aging. And so I have that as a new group, and you'll notice that it's actually added them together into this new group. Let's say if I clear my selection, if I just deselect all, and then go in and go my eating disorders, my metabolic disorders, and so forth. And again, I just use the OR function, and I can go, eating hyphen metabolic. Also, I think I'll throw in diabetes. No, not the moment, but just to give you a sense of the process here. And now what I have here is a variety of different groups that I can work with in terms of making group from field names, making group from field items, and so on. And so if I wanted to focus on these particular characteristics, eating and sleep, I can do that by going over to the create field from group names and group items. I want to go with group names. And I'm going to just pick the two that I've just selected. And I'm going to make it, I tend to give it a name like a group name, sleep plus eating disorders. Click OK. And now I have this new field that has these two that are groups. So there's identified under my definition 212 that are sleep, psychiatric, aging disorders, and there's 147 that are eating, metabolic disorders. Now I have this information that's also, if I go back over to the summary sheet, you'll notice that it's created a new field. I can then work with that information, like, for example, just jumping back to that list, selecting the list, going into my reports, I can build a pie chart, and there's overlap going on. That's what this is indicating. But I can also work with that in terms of just using a smart pie just to understand that overlap. So this is just one way of graphically representing it. Another way might be to see the intersection between my companies and so forth. So now that with regard to managing my company information, let's go back to the summary sheet and look at my assignee data. You'll notice that there are 6 groups within my cleaned assignee data. If I open this up, I have decided to focus on, and I'll just again enlarge this so we can see this. I want to look at my top 5 sometimes, or I might want to look at my top 20 sometimes. Or here are my small, what I'm defining as small, or I've searched the list with basically for universities, and you'll notice UNIV, school, and so forth. We actually have a thesaurus that'll help with that. Thesauruses are in a coming presentation, but if I go Control Find UNIV, I'm sorry, UNIV, you'll see if I select all. Whoops, that's because I didn't spell that right. Let me go back. It's UNIV. Select all. You'll see that all that I've selected, I can add to group and so forth, and I put them under my university. So this is kind of a pre-workup. Sometimes through the course of my analysis, I'm going to be looking at the top 10, or I might want to gauge the top 20, or separately the small. But the small is huge, right? Look at the small. I'd like to keep them in my analysis. And one way of doing that is basically merging the small entities with the top 5, for example, just to keep them in the data. So how do we do that? Well, if we go over to the refine, create field from group name, I'm going to make a separate field of just small, and I'm going to call them small. Click OK. And there's 10 entries to 10 records and so forth. But the whole point of this is that I want to keep this as a data point within my top 5, so I can measure my top 5 relative to a group called small. I can sort out who's in small as the analysis goes along, but I want to keep them in my analysis. So if I go back over, you'll see, just go back over one, you'll notice that here are my top 5, and I'm going to make a group from group items in this case. And here are my top 5. I've kept the different groups, but if I want to manage this, I can select all, and I can delete. Just some of the preferences. Fields that have groups on them can sometimes get in the way of your analysis and so forth. So I like to kind of manage that. But now I want to add a separate entity, add that separate group of small. And how do I do that? Well, it's a merging process. If I go back over to the summary sheet and I just X out, and I'm going to look at my data in its entirety, I'll notice that I have merge fields. And so it's just a matter of, here's my top 5. Here's my top 5 field I'm going to add. Here's my, if I go over my small field, if I add, and then I'm not going to keep the groups. There's no reason to keep the groups. So I'm just going to click OK. And now we have our small associated with these larger players, just keeping them in the data and allowing you to do the analysis. As for example, I'm curious to see how my different breakdown of my technologies relate to these particular entities. One way is analyzing with a matrix. And here we have, just make this a little smaller if I can. Just go with this. We're going to do a co-occurrence. We're going to look at our top 5 field that includes the small data, all the items in that, and we're going to look at our sleep disorders. Now, you'll notice I can look at these here by looking at the field that I made from group names, the 9 disorders. And I'm going to use all the items. And if I click OK, you can see how the small players are still in the data. But maybe if I'm curious about how Merck and this particular small player working in psychiatric information, I can come over and just basically use the detail window to sort this out. These are the 9. And these are the different companies that are in that data. And if I wanted to see this particular company, I can open up and I can look at these different companies in more detail using the using the title window, and you'll be able to read all of this information. Go over, and actually we have Pat Base's links in the data. So just to illustrate that process. Just kind of moving along here, let's talk about isolating inventors using the matrix to group a list. If I jump back over, you'll see that if I open up and go to my inventors, I've cleaned them. If I open them up, here's a list. There's no group on this list, but the question is, I'd like to know who the Merck inventors are within this very long list of inventors. How can I find them and identify them through a group? And that is by using a matrix. So if I build a matrix, and I typically in this process make the row items in a matrix the list that I'm going to be grouping. So if I just open up and build out inventors, here's my cleaned inventors. I'm going to put all the items. There's 1,500 or more, and I'm going to put in my assignee data, and I'll just go with my top assignees. There's 5, obviously, and if I collect that, and you'll see here this matrix. This is a matrix. This particular individual works for Merck. If I sort on this, these are all of the inventors that work for Merck. And if I right click, you'll notice add row selection to group. And here we have Merck. And if I click OK, go back to that list, and I'm just going to go back. I believe I have it in my sheets opened. Here's Merck. If I go back over and I want to see who works for Actalon, if I select that, add row selection, I can just add the name, Actalon, and go back one, and you'll see that this list is now identified Actalon inventors. And one handy thing to do is to use lists to help identify what is unique, what isn't unique between entities. And if I just show that briefly, if I do that through list comparison, if I jump over and build a matrix of, and I'm just going to take my companies. So I'm going to just go with my top 5 again. I'm going to use the small data. So there's the top 5 plus 6 plus the small, and I'm going to look at the IPCs. We have IPCs defined and so forth. Just to make it a little manageable, I'm going to leave it with the IPC8s. Quite a few of them here, and what I'm asking now is which of these are associated. Now, in this case, if I want to know who what the companies are, I'm going to basically identify all of the small entities on the on these IPCs. and I'm doing it in an opposite way, just to kind of give you a sense that, you can approach this two ways. So if I right click, add column selection, you'll notice that I'll just call this small. And now I'm going to select Merck, right click, add column selection, and I'll just call this Merck. Click OK. And now we have two groups that if now when I open up the list of IPC8s, and I can do that through here, I'll just go in, go IPC8. And just there it is. And you'll notice the little plus. Whenever you see a plus in these outputs, that means that there are groups on these on a particular field. And in fact, if I wanted to see all the groups that have a plus on them, like you can see that here they all are. IPC 8, if I select that, make it a group, we should have now, if I just go here and again, make it bigger, we have the small and the Merck. And what I want to know is, here's a particular IPC that is in the small group that Merck isn't working on. Here is another one that Merck isn't. I want to know what is unique between the small and the Merck. And that is by basically doing list comparison. So if we could go over to Analyze List Comparison, you'll notice that I'm going to pick small. I want to know what's unique and small when compared to Merck, and I'm going to do it on a list that's in the data, but I got to find it. So if I select this and go into that field, which is again the IPC8 field, just coming down, just going along here it is, the plus. Here is Merck, and I'm going to say, what unique with unique to small versus Merck, and click OK. And right away, we now have this new group that we can look at the information and see how they compare. So, groups are fantastic. Groups are really the real secret to all of this in terms of bringing this analysis into the world that you're working in. I think the last thing I just want to talk about is the whole factor map and the groups that are generated out of building factor maps and so forth. If I just sort this, I have a factor map already produced. If I just sort to it, you'll notice that this is just a clustering of words around particular